Next up in my National Park series is Saguaro National Park in Tucson, Arizona. I will be using 3 primary colors by M. Graham: Nickel Azo Yellow, Quinacridone Rose, and Phthalo Blue. But if you don't want to mix, just use colors you already have. You will also need an embosser, white gouache, and a scrubber brush. I start by wetting the sky with clear water. It's okay to go over the cactus. And I will put in a light wash of phthalo blue. And with the phthalo blue, I'm going to be careful of the right side of the cactus because that is the side that has sunlight shining on it. I liked the white that is still showing when I skipped over the texture of the paper with the brush. So I'm going to leave it like that. I'm not actually painting this fast. I sped up the video by half time. Here I'm mixing a little bit of phthalo blue and quinacridone rose to get a purpley color. And here I am getting a brownish burnt sienna color. And I'm going to start putting in the foreground because it won't be touching the sky. And I can work on this while the sky is drying. I'm keeping the value pretty light and looking at the reference photo so that I can see where to leave light. And here I'm doing a little dry brush. And this big round thing is going to be a bush. So I added in some shadow color. I'm getting a light green. I'm going to add in this cholla cactus. It's like painting thick branches. And I'm looking to see where I should be using green, which is in the rest of the small cacti all around the scene. And I'm just starting by painting them all the same color, light green. I'm going to come back and add details later. I'm mixing a brown for the mountains. And that's a little bit too dark there, so when you do that, just add a little bit of water. Negative painting around the one-way sign. I definitely want to keep that light. And there is a light space right here by this little set of cacti. When you look at the reference photo closely, you'll see that there are other colors in the mountain. And I'm not being specific about what the colors are from. I'm just adding them in. And that's the fun with mixing the color, is that you will automatically have color harmony throughout the painting because you are using the same 3 colors everywhere. I did a little splatter to get a little bit of texture, and I wanted to darken this background by the cactus so that the cactus stands out. And then I'm trying to match it on the other side of that cactus arm. Deepening the color around the one-way sign and around these little cacti here. When you mix on the paper, it's really fun to watch the colors meld together. There I added blue and then I added red. And now I'm adding a little bit of the mixed green color. Everything is dry and I'm mixing up 3 different greens. First I mixed yellow and blue to get the light yellowy green, and then I added more blue to the right side to get a bluer green, and then a little bit of red to the left side to get an olive green. I'm wetting the cactus with clear water and then dropping in the light green. And I can dip my brush into either of the greens, and it's pretty convenient. They are the value that I already want, and I don't have to think about mixing it out on a little palette. It's already on my plate. Some nice colors, if you have them, would be sap green, maybe a little bit of perylene green if you have it, or even some granulating colors like undersea green or serpentine green. Those two will separate out and leave your cactus with an interesting texture. Here I added a little bit of red to get a shadow. And I'm moving on to the rest of the cactus, trying to keep the right side of the cactus arms lighter than the right side. I'm just changing to a smaller brush to get that back arm. And that back arm's shadow is a little bit tricky because it is behind the cactus and there's another arm behind the cactus. So try to think about it as a 3D object. And then these other little ones are, I'm going over them with some darker color to add shadow on the right-hand side. I like to add red in because it gives it a little more interest. It makes it look a little rusty. This is a little pair of saguaros. I want to show that they are separate by making 2 shadows. Now the big cactus is dry enough so I can finish this arm, which is a little bit twisted where it's coming out of the cactus. And later when we do the embosser, we will show that with the way that we put the lines in. I want to take some of the white out of the one-way sign, so I just put a little bit of shadow color in there. I'm mixing the color for the pole, which is a burnt sienna light color. So I mixed a little yellow and red and then put in a tiny bit of blue. More blue to make it darker brown for the edges. I forgot that little guy back there. Just quick made him green. And now to make far away saguaros up on the hills with a light value of green, I'm just doing a bunch of different saguaro cactus shapes. And you might have to dab out with a paper towel to get them lighter. You don't want them all to be dark because that makes them feel like they're closer. I see a little grouping of like prickly pear cactus over here with some saguaro coming out of it. So I'm just using the edge of the paintbrush to dab on some pear. I dabbed on some pear-shaped colors. This is not a shadow. This is sort of where the mountain has an indentation. It's concave a little bit, so I wanted to show that dimension on there. A few more little cacti. This is a far away ocotillo, and the one in front is a closer up ocotillo cactus. And when I took this photo, they were blooming, so there will be some red blooms on them. And I'm just sort of scooching in some stuff around the bottom of each saguaro. They usually have a bunch of branches and debris all around their bases. If they haven't grown up under a Palo Verde tree, they will grow up under some other kind of shelter, and maybe that shelter is gone now. Making a little bit more burnt sienna, reddish color for the blooms of the ocotillo. I've mixed a dark brownish gray, and I am making the outline of the one-way sign using a small brush, probably a 0 or 00. Now I'm just scrubbling around some of that dark color to show a bunch of sticks and branches that seem like they're dead. It's very dry. Adding a little bit of the green color. The bush is darker on the left side because of where the sun is. And I want some of the branches to come sticking out in contrast with the ground. Did a little mixing on the paper there with some red. I'm mixing a very dark by using almost pure pigment from each color. And I'm applying that to the left side of the large saguaro. And then while it is still wet, use the small side of your embosser to put a few ridges in the cacti. Here I'm adding a light value of yellow on the light side. Added a little red there in the shadow and some more dark green. Then embossing in the ridges. This is a spot where several arms come out, and I'm going to be working on darkening those seams where they meet the main body. Need a pretty good shadow underneath this wobbly arm to make it stand out from the main body of the cactus. There, I wet the left side of that arm that's behind, and I am putting in that dark green. Wet into wet, or damp into wet. I don't have a lot of water on my brush. This little arm is further away, technically. It's a little bit darker than the other arms. I've added a little bit of red and then embossed. Now we'll let that dry, and you can see that I've magically added a shadow to that bush. I wet some of the ground and added in some of this shadow color that's on my plate. Here I am adding another ocotillo. It is back behind this arm, pretty far away. Because ocotillos are really tall, at least 8 feet tall. So this one is pretty far away. Now I'm scrubbing in some of the ground. It isn't exactly like the reference photo. I just want to get some texture on the ground and maybe a few shadows. And where this ocotillo is, there's a lot of branches and other kinds of plants confusing that. So I wanted to convey that by just scribbling in some branches and stuff. Here is the shadow for the ocotillo. And there's the shadow for something else that we don't see. Scribbling in that shadow on the left side of the saguaro. There's also some stuff underneath that little grouping of saguaros. I'm not being very specific about any of this. I just want to show that it is a lot of vegetation. Might be alive, might be dead, might be dormant. We don't know. So we just add a bunch of junk in there. I'm adding a shadow to this choyo cactus by just on the left-hand side of each branch, I'm adding a dark color, which is this dark green that I've mixed. I'm going to try not to work on this for too long because I want it to retain that dark shadow with that bright light. Okay, the big cactus is finished drying. And I'm now adding even more darks to where the arms meet. And fine-tuning the light on it. And here I'm going to add its ridges. These two are close enough that we can tell they have ridges. Adding a little more dry brush. That's when you hold your brush on its belly and it's not exactly wet, but it's not dry either. It's sort of dry damp. and you put some pigment on it and scrape it around. And this is another little grouping of prickly pears where I just dabbed on some of the prickly pear shape and put a saguaro in the middle. It's pretty easy to do when they're in the background. And here's a shadow on the mountain. And now I'm putting on the very dark darks. This is on dry paper. And then I put it on, and then I take a damp brush and smooth out the hard line. I mixed a purple and then added a little bit of yellow to neutralize it. And I'm now splatting onto the foreground some little pebbles or something just to give it interest. Now I'm going to use a wet paper towel. It's not wet, it's just damp. I dipped it in the water and I'm going to smear it across some of the mountains to make them look a little further away and not so sharp against the sky. And then fixing some of these dark shadows. I just loved when I saw this. I loved it when the one-way sign and the cactus's arm were pointing in the same direction. I couldn't pass up that photo opportunity. I've added a little bit of dark to each top, to the top of each arm. And I'm scrubbing out a little bit on these other little cacti. If you look, you can see that the prickles that are sticking up out of them are causing them to be whiter at the top. I wanted the dark there, but then I also wanted the very, very top to be lighter. I'm scrubbing a little bit in between the ocotillo branches to set them off a little better. And I'm using my Rosemary & Co. scrubber brush to make the right side of the cactus a little bit lighter and brighter. I dip it in water and I don't tap off any water. I just use all the water that's on it and scrub along where I want the paint to be removed and dab it with a paper towel. Now I'm just trying to see where I want to put a light glaze over some of the areas so that each item isn't sticking out all on its own. Not exactly a lost edge, but just a little subtle hint that everything is supposed to be together. I'm putting a little more of that color on the mountain, and then I'm going to add it just a little bit to the sign. It makes the whole thing feel a little more painterly. I want the sky to be a little darker up in the corner, and then a little bit darker up next to the cactus, but not that much darker. And I want to try to keep that white spot on the left. I'm going to add a little bit of blue somewhere else in the painting so that it kind of goes. You see where I went over the mountain a little bit with a very light glaze. I added a little bit there in the mid ground, and I added some on the foreground on the right. A little bit more shadow. Darkening the shadow of the bush here. I've gotten out my pH Martins Bleedproof white to really up the brightness of the sun here. I lost some of the white of the sign, so I'm going to add that back in. And I've added some to the tops of those small cacti all around. And I'm adding a little bit, sort of dry brushed, onto the sides of the big cactus. And then just a little hint of light on the background cacti. There's hardly any white on my brush. We are almost done. If you like this video, please share and like and subscribe. Thanks for watching, and I hope you have a great day.